Good morning and thank you for watching. We have a busy video and forecast here this morning. We have a busy week of weather ahead of us across the continental US. Now, at least relatively speaking, if we look across the states here this morning, fairly quiet, at least here on Tuesday. Not too many clouds across the US. We do have this trough lingering off the southwest coast of California that we'll have to talk about, some imminent weather there to discuss. We had a trough just move through it, just moved off screen here near the Carolinas, now pushing out into the Atlantic, but very quiet. And that belies what's to come later this week. And we can get a sense for that looking west across the Pacific. Now, the satellite product I have shown here kind of kindly paints these different air masses in different colors. So toward the south, kind of near the tropics, the warmer air masses are in green. And these upper level troughs, which we're so focused on as meteorologists, how they come together, how they're organizing low pressure systems. You heard Eric talk about that on Sunday evening. Those are our focus. And painted here, those are in red. And so we can quickly identify that one west of Los Angeles, to the northwest of that over the Gulf of Alaska, west of Canada. We can see that second, this more powerful, what we call these long wave troughs here. This one going to be the big weather maker this week near the end of the work week as that dives down into the central U.S., helping to amplify a very strong low pressure system, potentially near record levels in terms of how deep that low is over portions of the Central Plains, bringing a wider range of hazards. And we'll have to talk about this in the video here. Typically I'd set this up with more of what we saw this weekend or Monday, but I want to dive right into it because we just have so many different weather phenomenon to cover. Now, the last trough here, which I won't talk too much about, is further out into the Pacific, kind of between Hawaii and Russia or Japan. That one kind of will play a role as we go toward the end of the week here, maybe even early next week. But even beyond that, and I'll kind of get into the end of the forecast here. We'll talk about this at the end of the video, but potentially another system moving through next work week. Too far out to give details on that, but needless to say, a progressive pattern with a lot to talk about here. Now, I want to start with this trough nearer to the U.S. right now because that's bringing immediate impacts. We just look at the all hazards map here, valid as a Tuesday morning. And I'll actually refresh this, get this around 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern time. But over in the western U.S., we have flood watches for the southwestern portion of California. Winter storm warnings in pink north of there for the Sierra Nevada. That more connected to that next trough that we're going to see, that stronger one moving out of the Gulf of Alaska toward the United States. Some lingering fire weather concerns over New Mexico and Texas. That's going to be a continued concern as we go through the work week here. But otherwise, across the central U.S., portions of the northwest, the eastern U.S., not too much to talk about here on Tuesday or Wednesday. But that's going to change. This map is going to get significantly more colorful. I can assure you by Friday at the recording of the video that day, you're going to see far more colors and advisories on this map, unfortunately. If we look at the radar and zoom in on portions of California here this morning, the rain showers falling already. That's going to continue here through the day today. These could be a little bit stronger at times, prompting at least some flood concerns. We do have those burn scars from the unfortunate fires earlier this winter, and then the mountains and so the canyons and gullies here are always a concern for flooding in southwestern California as these cutoff flows come through. To get to the full kind of centered satellite view over the U.S., looking at the satellite imagery, valid before sunrise. You can see that making its way across the far eastern U.S. here this morning. Again, quiet. We did have this low come through portions of the southeast yesterday. In fact, it's actually dropped and helped to influence a brief tornado report here, but this one was fairly significant despite just one tornado report on this map. This was an EF2. It was surveyed very quickly by the National Weather Service out of Melbourne, Florida, impacting Seminole County, east or perhaps northeast of Orlando here. Now, EF2, not too strong, but certainly getting into the kind of that significant. We're starting to do some pretty impressive damage to some of the homes and the trees there. That's strong for Florida. Florida is no stranger to tornadoes, but you're getting a little bit stronger for that area. And just kind of interestingly, we typically see those kind of stronger tornado events in Florida during El Nino years because it's during an El Nino when we typically see a more invigorated subtropical jet stream that typically is flowing more so over the geography of Florida, helping to influence its troughs and low pressure systems there. So in fact, if you have to go back to the last kind of significant tornado there, you're typically going to find those in El Nino years or springs or winter. And so kind of curious that we're seeing that here coming out of a La Nina or a very weak La Nina. Now, I say that if I take you back to that satellite imagery that I started with, I mentioned the troughs here. Those are obviously easy to pick out in the colors here. But perhaps just as significant of these, at least going into the forecast to the end of this week, and I'd argue not only next week, but looking at the forecast that we're discussing and watching in the end of March and early April, even connecting it to the drought threat, that there's an equally important phenomenon on the screen here. It's just less obvious. If you look southeast of Hawaii, and I'll paint this for you to make it clear. southeast Hawaii, we can see these cirrus clouds moving toward the northeast relatively quickly. Now, there's this kind of filament that we can connect these two all the way over Mexico. If you look very closely here, no, it's going to be hard to see on the rendering here, but we can actually see those cirrus clouds moving fairly quickly over Texas, South Texas, Austin, toward Houston, flowing down towards Florida. And this is the subtropical jet stream. Now, this has been very weak this year. It's been kind of shunted out of our area, and that's part of the reason that we haven't seen a ton of tremendous precipitation events in portions of California or the Southwest. We saw drought develop this year, but that has been changing over the last week or two. In fact, we're talking about rainfall moving into California now. We just talked about a rainfall event that moved into portions of Arizona, some snow there at the upper elevations. We've talked about improved snowpack over portions of maybe the Southwest or the central western United States. And that has been, at least in part, due to this reinvigoration late in winter and early spring now of this subtropical jet stream. And it's in that subtropical component to the flow here that's going to link up with this much stronger trough to the north, helping to amplify quickly the very deep low pressure system that we're going to see this week. This is connected to all of those. This is also a flow pattern that's at least going to help some of these systems wrap up a little bit more, maybe bringing more reliable precipitation to portions of the northern plains or upper Midwest, an area that we saw pushing its way into drought earlier this winter. Jump over and look at the water vapor satellite imagery here. We can see those same troughs, so a pretty similar view, but at least wanted to show you more kind of traditional satellite imagery. And in fact, we can see that subtropical jet stream kind of popping out a little bit more obviously here, at least looking at the water vapor. But again, it's how these all kind of link up here over the next 3 to 4 days that's going to determine the forecast. And we can see that a little bit here. This is looking at the GFS forecast for 500 millibars vorticity. And that's kind of a fancy word for looking for upper level spin in the atmosphere. I'm going to make this forecast valid for Tuesday, 7 a.m., roughly the time of the recording of this video. So in terms of central time, there's that cutoff flow. You can see how comparatively smaller that is versus the long wave trough to the northwest of that. But I'm going to play this forecast forward into Wednesday. And now Thursday, we saw that potent trough come on shore in the western U.S. We'll talk about the impacts of that in a second. But you can see how amplified and wrapped up it is as we get into Friday. This is the Friday afternoon, March 14th, where we're going to see this low very significantly deepen over portions of the Central Plains and Missouri River Valley. And then it's going to quickly fold, occlude, strengthen a little bit further near Minnesota in the upper Midwest. This is very early Saturday morning, before eventually that trough kind of takes over the rest of the central and eastern U.S., bringing temperatures down Sunday and Monday, potentially bringing an extended severe threat starting on Friday here across portions of the central U.S., then into portions of the southeast, and then maybe even over into the Carolinas as we go through the day on Sunday as well. So that trough bringing a number of hazards that we'll have to talk about. Now we're getting all the way out to early next week. We're March 18th at Tuesday at this point, and we have another trough now moving into the western U.S. very quickly behind this potent one at the end of this work week. So that's what I was talking about earlier when I said we're in a progressive pattern. That one potentially moving into the central U.S. again on the stronger side, at least looking at that upper level spin in the atmosphere. And there's going to be a reflection of that potency at the surface where we're living, again on Wednesday, the middle of the next work week. So potentially another one to talk about. Too early for the details here, considering that we're kind of beyond 7 days. Just wanted to put that on our radar as something we'll have to watch going through the rest of this week, as well as that forecast updates. Now I'm going to take you back to this view. Let's not look at specifics of each trough here, but I want to show you something kind of interesting. And really, if you kind of watch these videos regularly, you'll notice Eric and I chasing after the same phenomenon as we put together a forecast. So I'm going to start this video here. This is very early Tuesday. And we'll see, kind of looking at this, the upper level height pattern here, along with the vorticity, is relatively west to east, or what we might call zonal flow. And you may have heard that say that word before. We do have some cutoff flows to the south of the jet stream here, the polar component to it. And then that subtropical component would be down here. You can see this relatively west to east flow with these little kind of waves in the atmosphere. Now, as I take this forecast forward toward the weekend, you'll notice that that west to east, that zonality of the flow breaks down. Now we have this fancy word we have for this is meridional. The flow going more with the meridians up and down north and south. You can see how it kind of broke down there. And now we have these three fairly significant waves that we'll have to talk about in the forecast. We just kind of went through the implications of that. And as I take this forecast into the next work week, you'll see the atmosphere shifts back near the end of next week, or well out into the forecast here, so I'm not going to talk any specific details, into that more zonal flow. And then if I could take this out any further, you'd kind of see that zonal flow start to break down again. It's going to kind of shift a little bit more wavy. It's kind of this interplay or this dance between momentum in the atmosphere and how it breaks down and where that's going to happen, which we're so often after when we're putting together these forecast videos. So when you hear us talking about El Nino, La Nina, or some of these events over in Asia, or global momentum, we're after that kind of pattern here, that almost like elasticities to the atmosphere, and it's playing a role this week as well with the large system that we're going to see come through. All right, I'm going to jump into the precipitation forecast here quickly. This is from the GFS. We'd usually start with the ECMWF, but that model in the morning runs has been a little bit delayed here on our end. So I want to start with the GFS, and we'll potentially get to the other portions of the forecast later. So I'll make this valid here as of Tuesday morning. We can see that cutoff low west of Los Angeles. Those showers making its way onshore as we go through lunchtime today, really already falling. We just kind of looked at that and the radar imagery earlier, eventually making its way into portions of Arizona. You can see it weakening, unfortunately, as it exits east of the Continental Divide here, leaving this area, which has been dry, with more dryness. And that's going to be kind of a consistent theme in the forecast. Eric discussed that on Sunday evening. Now, by Wednesday evening, that trough, the more potent system, is now coming onshore. The effects are being felt in portions of central California. The snow now falling in the Sierra Nevada Wednesday night into early Thursday, expecting significant snowfall there. Precipitation moving all the way through Southern California. That's always a question mark with some of these troughs as they come onshore. Not in this case, expecting additional rainfall amounts for Southern California. So this trough makes its way through on Thursday during the afternoon, pushing over the Intermountain West as we get into Thursday PM, overnight into early Friday morning, before eventually now Lee cyclogenesis taking over and already a very deep low pressure system developing east of the Rocky Mountains here. You can see precipitation falling in portions of the high plains, the foothills here, and this is Friday at afternoon. You'll notice east of the low pressure system, not a ton of precipitation here from the GFS on Friday afternoon, with the source region further to the south and west of that very dry. It's going to take a while for this to coalesce and produce some more precipitation, but we'll see that eventually sometime Friday afternoon, perhaps Friday evening in portions of Missouri, maybe Iowa, extending down through the Mid-South. Some question marks as to how far south we get some of the more significant severe storms, but those likely to form Friday evening before pushing through portions of Illinois, Iowa, eastern Missouri. And again, there's this kind of question mark threat for some of the more populated areas of Arkansas here as to how far south some of these severe storms form on Friday afternoon. Precipitation pushing all the way up into Minnesota at this point on the back side of this low pressure system, now very deep. We're talking 976 millibars. Not record low for some of the portions of the upper Midwest here, but a very strong storm. And as we go overnight into early Saturday morning, could see conditions transfer over toward blizzard-like conditions in portions of the eastern Dakotas, maybe even northeast Nebraska, portions of western Minnesota, perhaps even pushing into Iowa at times as we go through Saturday. Either way, very strong winds on the backside of the storm system, and then portions over the southwest as well, looking at fire weather near the end of the week. They've seen some of that here recently. Unfortunately, that's going to continue with the drought and the high winds there. Now, we're at Saturday afternoon at this point from the GFS, and another severe threat likely to develop in portions of the southeast, perhaps portions of Alabama, northeast Mississippi, southern Tennessee, maybe northwest Georgia, and then a kind of connected flooding threat to that as well over an area where we've already seen that this year in the Tennessee and Kentucky area, the Tennessee River Valley. So we're going to early Sunday morning, storm system pushing further into Canada, but we could see another severe threat Sunday afternoon along the Carolinas and the coastal plain here, portions of far eastern Georgia, maybe even sneaking some severe thunderstorm threats up further into the mid-Atlantic. This will all be kind of this 3-day system to watch across the central and eastern U.S. as we go toward and through the weekend. Early next week, I mentioned the potential for another trough. We're seeing that make its way onshore now Tuesday, now Wednesday, March 19th. We can see that making its way through portions of Missouri, Illinois, Iowa. Again, I don't want to talk too much specifics here in terms of where exactly that rain snow line is, where exactly the severe weather threat's going to be, but some confidence that we're going to be talking about another system potentially moving through the central U.S. 7 to 8 days from now. WPC from the National Weather Service puts out its risk map for the 3 to 7 day time period. This is typically a place to kind of keep an eye on various weather phenomena and threats, but looking at it this week through the end of the week and the weekend, there's almost too much on here to even account for. We see high wind risks through the end of the week here, critical fire risks in black. That's one of the more significant ones that are painted here on this map. You can see 3 days of that threat, the 13th. So we get into Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I don't want to downplay this threat here. We didn't see precipitation falling here. We didn't see blizzard conditions. We didn't see severe storms. But at the end of the day, as the storm system makes its way through, it would not shock me if some of the worst impacts or phenomenon from the system are felt in this area here, with high winds, down power lines, and the potential for rapidly moving brush fires with those very strong winds. You're talking potential excess of 60 miles an hour. And that's enough to cause big problems very quickly as we go through the end of the work week for portions of Texas, Oklahoma, eastern New Mexico, maybe even southern Kansas. Again, I do not want to discount the threat here, because despite the heavy rain, despite the flooding, we talked about the snow in the Sierras, the potential for severe weather elsewhere, this could have a large impact, and it's something to keep an eye on. Zoom in on the west here, we can see that trough coming on shore. This is from the 3-kilometer NAM model. I'll take this through Tuesday evening and through tonight, but it's really by Wednesday that that stronger trough has its impacts felt as that strong snow moves into, I should say heavy snow, Wednesday night into the Sierra Nevadas, where they could see snow amounts exceeding 3, 4, maybe even 5 feet. That's in the Sierra Nevadas, so a very good healthy dose of snow for an area that needs it heading into another growing season as they get through their summer here. If I just take that 3-kilometer NAM forecast to the end of the forecast to show the total snow amounts, again, going off our color bar here, we're talking 3 to 4 feet of snow at this point. I think it could exceed that in portions of the northern Sierra, where you can see that white color, exceeding what we've put as the limit for a snow total event in just 3 days. Look at the snowpack, the snow water equivalent as it relates to average for the western U.S. here, as we're in early March, near the end of the water year at this point. There have been concerns in the Sierra Nevada. I mentioned that earlier. Before the subtropical jet component got reinvigorated, they were running further below average. They've started to work back up toward average. You can see that they're about 80% of their snowpack. Further to the north over southern Oregon, portions of far northern California, and even the Intermountain basins, looking at further, or I should say more normal snowpack. But toward the southeast of the western U.S., really kind of the southwestern U.S., we're seeing the presence of that pre-existing drought, even in some of the snowpack values here, starting to inch their way further toward the north. So the Sierra Nevada is getting an improved, healthy dose of snowpack here. If we blow up the snowfall map nationally and take it out all the way through Monday the 17th, and let's put it to Tuesday, make it an even 7 days at this point. See the Sierra Nevadas, again, going off the color bar here, the Cascades included in some of those high snowfall values, and the Intermountain West receiving a nice dosage of snowfall as well. If we look at the WPC, their 7-day precipitation forecast. This is just all liquid equivalents here across the U.S. See high values over the western U.S., but it's this area here that I already mentioned that was shown on that hazards map for flooding. Northern Alabama, portions of Tennessee and Kentucky. This is a mountainous area, various river valleys. And again, it's been a focus already this late winter and early spring for flooding. That's going to continue, unfortunately, especially into the weekend. Saturday night and into Sunday, perhaps, is the time period that I'm most concerned for some of this flooding. Precipitation moving up into portions of the upper Midwest. Much of this falling as rain, except, again, conditions could translate toward more blizzard-like conditions on the backside of this. The models have been jumping back and forth as to when exactly that occurs, how much snow is going to come out of that, but regardless, very strong winds and a transition to snow is expected at some point. And while accumulations might not be high in portions of the Red River Valley of the North, you could see blizzard conditions anyway if just some snow starts to begin to fall with those high winds. If we zoom in on the western U.S., this is the same kind of 7-day precipitation forecast I just showed you, but showing more of these precipitation estimates. You can see higher values here across Southern California, 8 inches of rain equivalent. I shouldn't say rain, I should say liquid equivalent. So as if all that snow had been melted out, you're looking at 8 inches of water here, and that translates to something like 4 to 6 feet of snow, depending on the exact ratio here. So just enormous snowfall amounts coming to the Sierra Nevadas. This is that miracle March you're hoping for, especially coming into a March where you're below average on the snowpack. California getting that delivery right on time. I mentioned that the wind threat, particularly across the southwest, might be most concerning with this event. So we're looking at surface level winds. I've taken this all the way out to Thursday, March 13th at this point. We're looking at the afternoon of the 13th. See those high winds coming off the divide now in portions of eastern New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle, increasing in toward Friday morning, now March 14th, increasing towards Friday afternoon, and they might be their strongest. Again, this area, significant concern for both wind damage and the fire component as well, given the drought there. Lesser so Saturday across portions of the Southwest, but now you can see the strong winds pushing up into portions of the Dakotas, Minnesota, and the upper Midwest as we go through Saturday, perhaps peaking in intensity sometime on Saturday as we transition over toward that blizzard condition that we just talked about. Now, those were just looking at surface level winds. I'm going to show you the maximum wind gust forecast from the GFS to get an idea of where the most concerning wind threat is going to be as we go through the week here. Again, I'll take this through Wednesday. See relatively strong winds now pushing into New Mexico, again, Friday morning, West Texas, perhaps reaching an intensity in that area Friday afternoon before shifting further toward the north. You can see the Midwest. Looking at potentially some stronger winds getting near that damaging threshold as we go through Friday evening, and then ultimately into Saturday evening when the strong winds reach the Dakotas where that blizzard condition might be materializing at this point. With one of these strong low pressure systems moving in, 976 millibars, very deep, it's going to be pulling air, and I talked about this earlier, but pulling air into it from all sides. But on the southern end of that, or what we call the warm sector, we're going to see these temperatures increase all week. So this is the high temperature forecast valid as of today on Tuesday. Very warm across the central and eastern portions of the U.S. Cooler out west under the influence of the trough. Take this into Wednesday. Similar story Thursday. It's even more amplified with those much warmer temperatures across the Dakotas now. 70s pushing up into South Dakota. Minnesota into the 60s, perhaps reaching 70s in the southwest corner. Iowa into the 70s. Illinois into the 70s. And that extends across much of the central, eastern, and southern U.S. The west, under the influence of that potent trough, not a surprise to see it shifting on the colder side. Again, that phenomenon exists on Friday before ultimately the storm system comes through. By Saturday, Sunday, we see a brief cool down behind the system through the weekend. But we talked about how early next week, if we have another system, trough moving in and a low pressure system developing on Lee cyclone side here across Colorado and Kansas, we're going to be repeating this whole story. We mentioned this even at the beginning of this video, this progressive cycle with these systems after systems to talk about. I believe Eric mentioned he's asking for 7, or at least looking at 2 to 3 here at this point. And as this continues, we're expecting this roller coaster of temperatures to continue as well, with a bias toward warmth in the central and eastern U.S. If we look at 4-inch soil temperatures, this is forecast from the ECMWF. This forecast came out yesterday, but I wanted to show it here today, just to give you an idea of how these freezing line, which you can see here in black, is beginning to push further toward the north as we go through the work week here, all the way out toward Friday, where it's now up near the Canadian border. And we've increased those 4-inch soil temperatures well over 50 degrees, now even over 60 degrees in portions of the Corn Belt at this point as we go into Friday, ultimately cooling down on the back side of the system, but likely warming right back up as we get into the next work week with that next system that's likely to move in. I'm going to pick on one area here to show that story. This is Jefferson City, Missouri, kind of right in the middle of the state here. We're looking at that 4-inch soil temperature forecast from the ECMWF. You can see we're above 50 degrees going through the start of the work week, eventually reaching over 60 degrees by the end of it. Brief cool down, not going to reach freezing level at that line, but warming up quickly after that, well above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So temperatures warming up here in March. If this kind of system continues where we have these troughs moving in and these higher temperatures, we're going to consistently keep these temperatures shifting above that 50 degree Fahrenheit line as we shift toward April here, kind of waiting on that next cool down. Now, Missouri, particularly southwestern Missouri near Joplin, they're getting closer to that southern plains drought that we've talked about. So despite these kind of warm soil temperatures, if you look at the soil moisture, which is actually plotted here, you can see it falling slowly throughout this whole forecast here, starting maybe up near 40%, but falling below that. So with these warmer temperatures, a lack of rain in portions of the central and southern plains, that soil drying out will be an increasing concern. And we talked about that just on Sunday. If we jump over and look at the root zone soil moistures, this is near the top level, and see increasingly drying out in portions of the central plains, like we talked about in the southern plains here toward the southwest. Now, this map looked wetter just a few days ago with the systems that came through with the Midwest, but with all the warmth this week and relatively stronger winds with the lead up to this next system, higher evaporation values, and it's drying out that top level of the soil quicker this week than it otherwise would with the higher temperatures and the wind threats. So that's something to be mindful of. Despite these rain events that we've had, if we keep this potent progressive system pattern coming through, it's also drying out the top level of the soils pretty quickly here. We saw that yesterday in portions of the Corn Belt. We're going to see it through the rest of the week as well until that next rainfall event comes in on Friday. Now, outside of the strong wind threat that we've discussed over portions of the southwest. We talked about the blizzards to the north. We talked about the impacts to the western U.S. Perhaps the biggest threat here that we're looking at near the end of the week is with severe weather. I want to talk about that for a moment. That conversation is going to start here with this dew point forecast. I'm going to make this valid here as of Wednesday evening. This is March 12th, because at this time that low pressure system is starting to develop here off the east side of the Rockies here, and that's going to be pulling that moisture north. We talked about that. The wind's coming inward near that low pressure system. As air is exhausted in the upper levels of the atmosphere, it's brought in beneath that to fill that in. That brings that Gulf moisture up, and we can see that with these dew point levels rising across portions of the southern Mississippi River Valley. As we go into Thursday afternoon, you can see dew point levels again rising across portions of the south, and ultimately by Friday afternoon, 60-degree dew points starting to inch up into Missouri here along the Mississippi River before Friday evening, really kind of trying to push up into Illinois. So we're going to be watching how much moisture, how much instability we can get further toward the north to see where that severe threat might materialize on Friday evening. Now, again, watching portions of Arkansas, the Mid-South, potentially up into Iowa along the Mississippi River, portions of eastern Missouri. That's going to be an area of concern and focus as we go through the day Friday. Through Saturday, there'll be plenty of moisture across portions of the southeast, Alabama, portions of southern Tennessee, and really watching more of an area around here for focused severe threat on Saturday. It wouldn't surprise me, in fact, if we see a more localized but more damaging severe thunderstorm scenario in Alabama on Saturday versus what we might see on Friday. Both look fairly potent at this point, but I'm extra concerned about the one we might see in portions of Alabama as we go through the day on Saturday. And I'll tell you why here on this slide. I'm going to show you surface-based CAPE. Now, this is just a measure of instability that we track for severe thunderstorms. You can see it's reaching adequate levels at this point in portions of Iowa, eastern Missouri, and Illinois on Friday afternoon before dinner time. But again, can see it also increasing in portions of Arkansas. We're kind of drawing out that risk area for severe storms on Friday. Overnight Saturday, as that front comes through, it weakens that severe threat over portions of the Corn Belt, but we're increasing it here over portions of the southeast on Saturday, ultimately perhaps peaking in concern around Saturday afternoon or evening, maybe even into the overnight hours. Now, when we're kind of talking about the severe weather threat, at least for the T word for tornadoes, something I look at is low-level wind shear. There'll certainly be plenty of upper-level wind shear with how strong the system and the trough is. But I'm just looking at winds a mile above the surface here. And I'm going to take this forecast valid for Friday afternoon, and particularly winds coming out of the south about a mile above the surface. These are strong winds. We're talking about values up near 50 knots. And just off the surface, that's going to produce plenty of low-level wind shear. And we can see at least out of the south, these ones here more out of the southwest, but when they're due out of the south, we have more wind shear. You can see that painting a more specific area of concern on Friday afternoon. Portions of far southeastern Iowa, western Illinois along the river, eastern Missouri, and perhaps northeast Arkansas. So again, at least for that tornado threat, it's very early in the forecast to have all the details here. But at least we have some localized area of concern that we'll have to keep an eye on as this forecast updates throughout the week. Now, I'm going to go overnight and jump this towards Saturday afternoon, same time period. And now we're focusing on a different risk area. Again, strong winds out of the south a mile above the surface. That's at least one ingredient I look for the stronger, more concerning tornado threat. So Friday, painted in through here. Saturday, portions of eastern Mississippi, southern Tennessee, and Alabama. Those are going to be two areas I'm going to be focused on. See it really just peaking overnight. Northern Alabama, southern Tennessee again. In those later hours on Saturday, increasingly concerned for that area here for a tornado threat. We'll have to watch and see how that forecast updates throughout the week. The best place to do that is the Storm Prediction Center. You can see their Day 4 outlook, valid for Friday. Paints an area of concern similar, right, that we just did. We showed that adequate instability here, kind of pushing through portions of Iowa into portions of Nebraska. But that extra area of concern, at least for tornadoes, was in through here. There's some question as to the southern extent of these severe storms as we go through the day Friday. So we'll have to see how this forecast updates as we go through the week here, Wednesday, Thursday, and then ultimately on the day of. Now, if we take this into Saturday, boy, not a surprise to see the Storm Prediction Center kind of painting that same area of risk, pushing it maybe more into Georgia, even far southeastern Tennessee, but nonetheless a similar area that we just painted. Looking at the other parameters. I'm going to wrap this up here because I know we took a long time on some of the hazards map. I'll say briefly, we're going to talk more about the drought threat here as we go through the work week here in these videos. But I want to start here and kind of tie things together with the subtropical jet stream. If we look over the last 60 days of precipitation, how that has departed from normal, really trying to look over the start of the new year, you can see we've been dry in the western U.S., we've been dry in the southwestern U.S. relative to average, even dry over portions of the Corn Belt and the upper Midwest, and we saw a lot of flooding concern across portions of the Mid-South and other areas further west of that earlier in late winter, not really even into early spring. This was more of a pattern that built itself in and got baked early in the late winter time period as we shifted toward the new year. Now I'm going to update this map for the last 7 days, and you can see it's subtle, but more precipitation just in the last 7 days has moved into an area where we saw that drought increasing through winter. So portions of California, the Southwest, even portions of Nebraska, South Dakota, the upper Midwest. And I think this is connected, again, to that reinvigoration of the subtropical jet stream. It has allowed these lows to amplify and get even stronger here, and that's at least allowed us to pull some precipitation up into the southern plains. It's helped us get some of this backside precipitation here across portions of the central plains. It's helped to bring some of these cutoff lows and these systems through California, where in fact we're talking about one here this morning. If we just look at the upper level height field and those jet stream level winds here valid as of this morning, you can see that polar component to the jet stream. Remember how we talked about how that was breaking down, getting zonal, and then breaking down again. Well, here's that subtropical component. At the beginning of this video, we painted those cirrus clouds all the way from Hawaii to Texas. And there it is in the wind field. And this is the piece here that's helping to invigorate some of these storm systems. And the question kind of becomes, if we keep this pattern up through the next 20, 30 days, are we going to help push away some of the drought concerns in the central plains? We know we have them here across the Southwest, despite some increased precipitation recently. We know we have that drought kind of built in over portions of far west Texas, but is it going to establish itself here as we go through spring plant and try to push north into the upper Midwest or even the high production I states as we go into the new year, like the NMME painted? That's kind of the big question. I don't have that kind of firm answer for you yet, but I will say, if this subtropical jet stream sticks around, which it could with an MJO kind of coming back into the Western Pacific and perhaps transiting back around to the Western Hemisphere. Before we thought this forecast might take it through the Eastern Hemisphere, but if it wants to double back quickly, like the CCMWF forecast here showing, well, the jet stream might stick around, that subtropical piece at least. And then also we talked at the beginning with that EF2 tornado in Florida. That's more El Nino you'd like to see, significant tornadoes in Florida. And in fact, if we look in the Eastern Pacific along the equator, we actually have some pretty warm water that's built in here over the last 2 to 3 weeks. Our La Nina is now pushing further toward the west, and we almost see this split, sometimes called a Mendoki La Nina, but we see the split where we have this, what looks like the early developments of an El Nino and what looks like a weak La Nina pushing to the west. So we'll have to see how this kind of evolves too as we go through the next month or so. It's likely that these warm waters here might be playing a role in the reinvigoration of that subtropical jet stream, which has all the implications we just talked about throughout this video here. So watching the interplay between these two and how that forecast updates going through the end of March will be critical. Eric already touched on Sunday evening that the ECMWF extended forecast, which we sometimes call the weeklies, hasn't painted the rosiest picture through those same areas that we just talked about. However, despite it updating here in the last day and not changing that story much, again, it's not lining up well with what we're seeing, I think, from the subtropical jet stream, at least in terms of it hanging around. So we'll have to see. I don't have a ton of confidence in this forecast right now. The piece of this forecast that I do buy into and that I am concerned about is, at least with the pre-existing drought here across the Southwest and portions of northern Mexico, that is likely to reinvigorate the dry line at times and shift it further toward the east. So this kind of extra focus of precipitation here, i.e. potential severe weather, I think will continue. Obviously, we're talking about this as an area of concern near the end of this week. And I'll actually extend that concern even up into portions of the middle Mississippi River Valley through the Mid-South at times as we shift into April, where reliably, climatologically, historically, that severe threat begins to shift north up into the Corn Belt anyway as we get into April and May. So if I'm concerned about anywhere here in terms of the severe weather season, it's painted on a line similar to where the CCMWF extended forecast through kind of the middle and late part of April, showing a similar area of activity, at least for precipitation. And we could extend that to being a thunderstorm concern as well. With that update that came out just yesterday from the extended forecast, we are again seeing that early April cool down signal. We'll have to keep an eye on this. Again, not set in stone. We see some initialization bias out west here, but at least right now, this forecast is actually getting even a tick colder on the latest update So this is something we're going to keep an eye on in early April as well here. I'll wrap it up there. Thank you for watching. And again, stay safe near the end of the work week. Eric will have an update for you Wednesday morning with hopefully some more details on the specifics of the severe threat as we get through the day Friday and then into Saturday. And then maybe even looking at the Carolinas on Sunday briefly. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you all soon.